This is an example of an observation tool. Here, this observation tool is designed to measure STEM program quality in out-of-school time. Right? If you see an observation tool like that, few things to pay attention to are the following. First of all, who developed it and who are the sponsors of it. Here we see the National Science Foundation, very reputable source, and the Program in Education After School Resiliency, the PAIR, which is also a reputable organization within the after school space, and then the Educational Testing Service, which are the publishers of the SAT and other tests. So three pretty reputable organizations here. Right? And sometimes you might find less reputable associations or organizations. Then it's up to you to kind of do a little bit of research and find out more about who is behind a certain tool. Then here, this is more a description for users, so you could look at, okay, does it fit my needs? Here we have the different dimensions for observation. Right? Then you get some more information about the data, etc. Then here you have a certain certification process, right? You have a 2-day live training, then you have a calibration exercise, calibration call, and then 2 field observations, and then ongoing technical assistance and certifications. So this is quite usual, right? Because people want to assure that the raters that use their tool have the appropriate training so that the ratings can be reliable. Then also here you can look a little bit at the overview of the dimensions. The theoretical assumptions behind it are sometimes discussed as well. Then here you see a sample rubric, right? And this shows you how we're trying to capture the qualitative nature of an environment and quantify it through these rubrics, right? Is it a 1, 2, 3, or a 4? And then we describe this in quite great detail. And when you go through a training, you learn what these different levels in a rubric, what they mean, right? And you're being trained to spot this in the environment and assign a rating to a certain environment. Right? And then oftentimes when you have different dimensions, it might be easier to make a rating for one dimension than for another dimension. Then here I have a sample report, right? What you will get for a certain region, and you can have comparisons as well, right? So if you are, for example, the manager of after-school programs, you could see how can we develop our program. It might be useful for continuous improvement. Maybe there's some evaluations that you need to do, etc. So these are the dimensions that you can use with this tool. Then also what you will see, contact information, right? That sometimes give you some more information about who is behind it. And here this person is pretty well known in the character education space, moral education, and then evidently Harvard is not too shabby of a university either. Now, if you were just a user, that might be enough information. However, as a researcher and maybe also as a critical user, you would want to know a little bit more about the detailed development of a tool. So this is where the technical report or the psychometric report comes in. And we see here the same lady again, Ashima, and then we see, okay, there was this lady here from the Educational Testing Service, and then there's this person, Jill Noam from Harvard, and Drew Gittimer that published this. So this again is how they developed and refined the observation tool, right? And then they document the field testing and establishment of psychometric properties. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but just kind of show you what you can look at. So first of all, to talk about, well, what's the purpose here and how do we measure the quality of after school science, science in this after school programs. Why is our measure valid? So you want to ground the measure in the construct validity, right? Basically saying, what does the quality, what is that? And then from there, and once you agree that this is what it is, now how do we measure it, right? So they came up with these different dimensions. Then they talk about their study design, surveys, observation site, the observers, training the observers. They talk about the sampling, right? Whatever sampling they used to validate their measure might also inform who you can use this measure with, right? Imagine if this was developed in the Midwest and now you want to use it in California. One question would be, well, does this also work with Latino students, or does it matter if there's a lot of English learners in your sample? Those are the basic questions. Then to talk about scoring and generalization, and then they have this discussion about what they learned from this initial refinement and validation study. Right now, here we are. I have the key findings, so you could see what is done well, what not, and you talk about the inter-observer reliability. Which this is an important measure, right? This will answer a question about: does it matter who I send to go observe a program? How well do people tend to agree with with each other when they rate something, right? So that is important for an observation tool. First of all, how well do observers agree with each other? Then the other thing is to find out more about, let's say, inquiry in this after-school program. The question would be like, do you have to go at multiple occasions, or is it enough if you go once? Right? Another question is, okay, if there's different modules or different lessons that are part of this program, well, does, for example, inquiry vary across these lessons, and therefore should you go observe various lessons as well? And I'm gonna go show you some more details here. Talk about the sampling, the observation procedure. Talk about how many programs, how many observations, how many observers, what kind of age group was involved, grades here, numbers of students, and all this could be very relevant to figure out, well, who did they test it with, and that might inform you that informs you also who you can use it with, and if you use it with a totally different group of youth, that might be problematic. Here you see correlation among the dimensions, right? How well do they correlate with each other, right? For example, you see, let's pick out a pretty high correlation here. We have a high correlation between inquiry and engagement with STEM, right? So these two are very highly correlated, whereas purposeful activities is not associated with space utilization. However, it's associated, moderately with materials and organization, etc. So this tells you kind of like how do these dimensions interrelate. And then there's one more thing I want to show you. This here is from the generalizability study, and this is basically information that informs you, this table here informs you, as a G study, how is the variation distributed to different factors in your study. The M here stands for modules, OM stands for observations modules, V is for visits, modules and visits, and then this here is basically the error term of whatever you can't associate to a specific source. So, for example, here the organization tells you that 17% of the variation in the organization scores is associated with the modules, and about 75% is associated with the error term, so that you don't know why it varies, but it does. So if you have a high association of variation with, for example, the module or with the observers of modules, right, you could say, well, it varies a lot across modules, so probably I should go look at a lot of different modules in order to have a good idea about organization. If the observers would draw a lot of variation, then you say, okay, you know what, the observers tend to not really agree that much. It tends to matter of who the observer is. Then you might want to send in more observers to get a more accurate estimate. So this can get quite technical here, but in order for you to have a good idea about the quality of the tool, these kinds of technical reports are a very good source, and usually you also get a good impression of what the theoretical background for it is, and helps you, probably also through lit review and to connect it to other studies.